Hello and warmly welcome to SAP on Azure YouTube podcast. Today I will talk with Holger and myself everything and anything related to SAP and Microsoft. Hello. High availability is a kind of topic close to my heart, but it is also very important for the productive and most critical SAP on Azure system because it helps you to minimize not only unplanned downtime, but also planned downtime, As an example, OS patching on Azure maintenance or SAP kernel patch and DB patching, which requires some restarting of something, of VM operating system, SAP instance of database. Now, you as an admin, you always need to constantly busy yourself with, for example, implementing the best practices checks. And there are many of them which are constantly changing, You as an admin, whenever you do, you would love to simulate also and test the failure, do some HA tests, because you want to make sure that those settings, whatever you do, are working properly and as expected. Luckily, we have from Microsoft a tool called STAF or SAP Testing Automation Framework, which is a kind of newer tool, which in helping you in this task. We talked in the past some weeks ago about it. Now there's some new updates and new features. I'm more than happy to welcome again, Devansh and Hemanth and Dennis, which I call a kind of Indian dream team, here doing the magical behind, Welcome, guys, but warm welcome to the session again, But before we start, there might be some folks we do not know you, So maybe let's start with some quick introduction, Who are you? What do you do at Microsoft?
Glad to be back on the podcast again. My name is Hemanth. I work as a product manager in the SAP and Azure product group, and we work on building open source solutions that help customers get the most value from their Azure workloads. Dennis?
Yep. Hi, I'm Dennis. I'm a principal software architect in SAP engineering team. I mostly focus in creating reference architecture for SAP workload on Azure with a strong emphasis on the HA and DR. And I also lead some of the quality testing effort in Microsoft for SAP workload.
Hi, I'm Devansh. I work as a software engineer on the SAP on Azure team, primarily focusing on the automation tools for deploying, installing, and testing the SAP systems on Azure.
Great. So I heard basically we have some really interesting updates, So, it's a newer tool. So if I'm not wrong, it's still in kind of preview, but there are some really fancy and very valuable news, So tell us a bit more. What do we have?
Sure. Devansh, do you mind sharing?
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay, we can see the PowerPoint.
Yeah. So essentially, what we're going to talk today is the testing automation framework, the SAP Testing Automation Framework, as what we like to call as STAF. What it is essentially it's an open source orchestration tool specifically designed to validate the SAP infrastructure deployments hosted on the Azure platform. The primary objective is to assist customers in maintaining the optimal performance of their SAP systems by validating the systems and uncovering any potential issues before they can impact the production system, right? Now, what does that mean? So if you're preparing to go live, conducting a compliance audit, or even testing the system before maintenance windows, what STAF does is it automates what traditionally took like hours or days, of manual effort into a repeatable process, which is automated. And because it is repeatable, that you kind of get consistent or deterministic results when you're actually running these things. Now, there are two parts to this. One is the high availability testing. What it does is it executes controlled failure scenarios to verify that the pacemaker clusters or your HANA system replication and central services respond correctly when the failures occur or as documented within the SAP and Azure documentation that's available. Each test has a very specific pattern. It captures a baseline state from where you're starting your test, which is important. Then we inject a failure and then monitor the cluster reaction, validate the behavior, and then restore it back to the stable state it was before we started the test. What the second part is the configuration checks. What it does is it actually does a read-only validation of the SAP system settings against documented Azure best practices and SAP notes, right? So this allows you to actually, one is a behavioral test and the other is a state validation. So you get like both aspects of the system tested when you're actually running and executing the framework, right? If we go to the next slide. What we have is it's an overview of how the current system works, right? So we have essentially, like I said, you have an initialization, then you have the discovery and connectivity, and then the module initialization and execution of the tests, and then reporting, which is kind of important, right? But instead of me giving a deep dive on this, let's go to Devansh and Dennis to talk more about how the framework actually works.
Sure. So to begin with, as kind of Hemanth highlighted on, the way we get started with using the testing framework is, you have like a complete end-to-end system deployed, either using STAF or any other automation or even manually. After that, what we really want to do is, what we're looking at is, we have this SAP landscape up and running. Now, the next step that we want to do, before going live is, validate that the system that we have built up is, is in line with, what SAP on Azure documentation mentions. So the way we begin by is, setting up a management server. We have like a setup guide for that, how you can set up the management server. It can be within the same virtual network, or it can be part of your other virtual network. But the key point here is that management server has connectivity to your SAP environment. Now, once you have that management server ready, the way it works is you begin with initializing, which type of test you want to run. So we have a couple of test types that we currently support. One is the high availability functional testing, where you can really test how your high availability cluster would behave in different failure scenarios. Second is the configuration checks, which is, as mentioned, like it's read-only test where we just fetch some parameters from your system, and then we also fetch some parameters from Azure, and then validate it against what is the recommendation on SAP on Azure. So we begin by selecting one of those test types, and then we do this, and then initialize the connection properties to your SAP system, like what are the IP addresses, what are the connection strings, and then a few basic information about your SAP system, like what is the SID, the instance number, and those kind of parameters. Once we have gathered all these parameters, you can persist. This is all persisted on the management server, so it can be like made a repeatable process, and then can be run multiple times. And then once all this information is provided, you can just initiate a script using which you can either run the configuration checks or the high availability checks. The way it works is, once you initialize the script, it would call the the Ansible playbooks and the Python modules, and a bunch of configuration return in YAML, and then using all of this code that we have on our GitHub, it makes an SSH connection to the SAP system virtual machines, and then executes tests, and then based on the type of test that we are executing, either say functional test, it would keep constantly generating logs, and then after the test or configuration checks are run, the last step that we're looking at, is the consolidation of results from all the different VMs, and then analyzing whether the test or the checks have passed or failed, and then at the end generating reports with complete snapshot of what are the different steps that were executed and what really passed versus what really failed. So this kind of gives an holistic view of what really goes behind the scenes when you execute that script.
And you have only the SSH connection. I mean, nothing else, right? To the
Yes,
machines.
no, yeah, that's exactly. So we just make an SSH connection. There's nothing installed on the SAP servers. We don't install any packages. We don't we don't have any agent that does this part. So it's just the
Correct.
management server
Yeah.
making an SSH connection to the SAP VMs, and then performing the tasks, or getting the information that is required.
And I think that that's important information. There is no need for any management agents, because often at customer side, they don't like it, because everybody will put some agent, and they don't like to put on, especially on the SAP landscape, some agent, right? So and that's a kind of big advantage here, right?
Yeah, it's also one of the reasons why we have Ansible as the configuration or the orchestrator for some of these things, right? Because Ansible is by design like agentless, and it doesn't need you to install anything on the target machine. Sorry, Dennis, go ahead.
Just wanted to highlight that as for most of these test scenarios, where with regards to high availability functional testing and configuration check, whatever the information that we gathered on running this framework it's basically informative. We don't STAF doesn't make any changes into the system. Okay,
Right.
so once if there is a discrepancy on whatever the best practice or the guidelines that is out there, and if it finds that something is not set accordingly, it will highlight that this has not been set correctly. So customer or whoever is using this framework has to manually update that. So this basically gives you all the view on adopting all the best practice that we have. And over the time, as we all know that over the time the best practice evolves, okay, and we have a new set of best practice. So this framework could be utilized with a given time as well. Like if you have built a system right now, and if you want to keep on validating every quarterly or 6 months or after every changes, you can basically run that same framework again and validate that.
Yeah, that's a very interesting point that Dennis brought up, because that's a kind of a common pattern that we have seen with our current customers, and they are happily using it for their own use cases. But this is something that we have seen very frequently, that they want to run before every quarterly release or before every half yearly release that they do. So that is a common usage pattern that we have seen with customers who are using the STAF today.
And I mean, it's best practices are continuously changing, and adding new, maybe updating the one. So you are also basically updating your rules, what it needs to be, what is the kind of the latest and updated part. So the latest and the greatest best practices, right?
Right. So just wanted to add, like we are using this tool for our internal testing as well. So whatever we found and discovered during our internal testing with regards to the testing, the quality testing for new OS releases and things like that. So idea is to use this framework, because for us as well, we want to make sure that our quality testing is fast and accurate enough, so that so this was one of the idea of building such automation framework. So the initial idea was to basically use this framework for the internal testing, but I think we want to make it open so that customer could also use it. Okay, so that's the whole thing, where when we discover anything during our internal testing, we make sure that it gets updated in that, and whatever we have learned and whatever we have discovered is applicable on this. Means it's been taken care in the framework as well.
Right.
Yeah. So coming back to, so what was the real purpose, behind, building this testing framework? Like we have already highlighted enough that, the real, the real value is, verifying and validating after the systems are built, whether they can perform in the real world scenarios. And as we all know, like real world is not perfect. There will be failures. There something or the other will go wrong. So what this tool really helps you do is, build that confidence before like going live, that,
Yeah.
there are certain scenarios in which, things will perform like this, and there are certain configurations that are correctly set or not. But because ultimately it's the configuration, it's the infrastructure configuration, it's the high availability configuration that will, perform, that will trigger certain events in a certain sequence. And if those are, set with, precision and in line with SAP on Azure documentation, then that gives you like a lot of confidence. And at the same time, while you are validating the configuration, once you are doing the functionality testing as well, that gives you like a real world kind of confidence that we have tested certain scenarios, and like the cluster is able to recover, the services are able to come back up online, and then the cluster behaves as as expected in those dire situations. And then since all of this is highly automated, like in the sense you just literally have to initiate a script, or you just have to provide certain parameters, and use the automation to do this. That's kind of a cherry on top of what we already had in our SAP on Azure documentation. Like while we had all of these documents, all the parameters documented, all the test cases documented, we really felt the need to give this tool to the users who can, actually make use of their, manual efforts, save them for better things, and then use this automation. And apart from this, we have also focused a lot on verifying that this, while this framework is highly extensible, you can also make sure that you are able to generate detailed logs every time you execute even the smallest of the scenarios. Like for example, you're just generating, like we had an example working with a customer there. They're specifically facing scenarios when the VM is abruptly going down. Particularly the secondary server is going down in case of HANA VM. So these kind of scenarios help the customer uncover what are the specific scenarios which can help mitigate risk when it really it is required. And then once they encounter this, the difficult part in my opinion is to identifying what is going wrong. The fixes are usually very simple to make. So this tool has really helped customers so far, in identifying what are the specific scenarios in which things could go wrong or things are going wrong. So that's the real purpose, and that's the real value we think this framework is giving the customers. And it's already we are seeing live with our customers who are using this framework.
Yeah, because I mean, you don't want to test the HA during the production, right? When something goes wrong, if something goes
Absolutely.
wrong, you want to be sure that it's really working and you prove it, right? So
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and one thing I just want to add, so whatever the framework captures or whatever framework does in terms of functional testing, it's all documented. It's all available in .doc. So
Right.
it's not
Mhm.
something that is specific to this framework. It's just that the framework helps the user to do task automatically and more in compliant fashion. Okay, but whatever best practice that is part of our learn.microsoft.com guidelines that is available. So nothing changed if you're following that guidelines. This tool can help you verify in scale across all your SAP systems so that your time to go live or time to for quality testing has get reduced. So that's the accomplishment one can achieve using the this testing framework.
Yep.
nice.
So moving on to the different test types that we support. So first up comes is the high availability functional testing, where we perform a series of automated tests that kind of simulate what can really happen in like real world. Like for example, the network goes off, the two primary and the secondary VM lose connectivity between them, or the storage goes offline, or there's something at the lower level that that kind of triggers a failure on the virtual machine itself, and then that is completely like you can't really connect to that VM. So all these kinds of scenarios we have tried to mimic using our using this type of testing. And then the other type of scenarios, certain services stop responding. So for example, the chorusing service, the pacemaker service, or on the central services side, certain services have stopped working, or the database is no more running on a particular site. So we have kind of tried to simulate all of these different scenarios in the tests that we have defined. And when you run the high availability function testing, all these tests are run sequentially, and that is followed by we do a baseline check, as Hemanth was mentioning, and what that really does is verify that the primary and the secondary servers are the databases are up and running and the cluster is stable. That is when, once we have validated that, we inject the actual failure into the system and then monitor the behavior of the entire cluster. And then after the expected behavior is met, we verify that this cluster has come back up online. If everything is fine, if all the configurations are fine, all the network setup is fine, we expect that the system should recover on its own. And then we do the post validation and then clean up everything that may have been created, like for example any location constraint or any failed resources. So we clean up everything and then generate logs for the entire steps that we have gone through. So apart from this, one of the recent features that we have added is offline validation of high availability cluster configuration. What this means is that you don't even have to now connect to your SAP system to basically validate your cluster configuration. So what that means is, like, you can just bring your cluster configuration using the CIB admin command, and then you can literally just run the like all the validations for your cluster configurations on your management server itself. So that does not even require you to make a SSH connection to the SAP VMs. So this is one of the recent features that we have kind of shipped. And like this kind of gives value, especially in scenarios, where, the system is live, the users do not want to connect to the SAP system using using SSH. So this kind of gives that kind of functionality, where you don't even connect to the SAP system.
So it kind of does a spot check of your cluster configuration, right? So you don't have to really run the behavioral. You're not looking at the behavioral aspects of the system, but you're more looking at a snapshot of the system at a point in time, and you're checking if all the parameters are in line with what's documented for running your SAP workloads in Azure, especially in the high availability scenarios involving pacemaker clusters, right?
So basically, in pacemakers, those config description is in this XML files, if I'm not wrong, right? Yeah. So meaning,
correct.
If somebody is just exporting it and giving to anybody, by feeding that XML to the tool, you will actually recognize what kind of resource you have and how is the configuration, and you can run it kind of on an offline part, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Nice.
Yeah. So just want to add in with regards to this. So earlier, like when this was, so right now STAF is available GA, and this HA functional testing is basically, earlier we had that restriction that one could use this tool for a new SAP deployment where the database size are usually very low, like in GBs. But now we have extended it to be used on the existing database size, where your database size could basically range into some TBs as well. So just wanted to highlight that if the customer wants to use this high availability testing for their existing database, which is basically in the range of some TBs, we want to make sure that they could use these tools, but in order to, before using this tool, make sure that you replicate whatever you want to do in production in your quality system, as well to understand that the tool works fine with regards to the database size. Because and some of the tips with regards to how to use this tool for the active production system, because or if you want to use the end-to-end use case of this high availability functional test, where you want to perform all the test scenarios, then it takes usually of 90 minutes to complete the end-to-end testing. And if they want to use for the existing production system, they have to account for this 90 minutes, because we advise customer that they could use this high availability functional testing feature during their maintenance window, where the new business users are active. They could perform the end-to-end testing for this high availability testing using this framework, and the time to basically uh, account for in this maintenance window is what they have uncovered during the testing on the similar quality system. Okay, and to our and based on our internal testing, we accounted like it takes up to 90 minutes based on the size of the database. So that's something one has to uh, get an idea while using this tool.
Nice. Yeah.
So moving on to the second type of tests that we have is the configuration checks. This is kind of a new version for the quality check tool that was already out there. We wanted to give a comprehensive tool that takes care of all the quality related features that we do from SAP on Azure. So configuration checks is basically the new version for quality checks. What this does is it really does a comprehensive validation of the entire SAP system configuration, be it in the infrastructure, the operating system layer, the HA configuration, or even the database configuration, like what are the different parameters that are being set, and then the different kernel parameters, the different services, what are the services that are active, what are the extensions that are deployed on the virtual machine. So it is a combination of both the operating system level and the the infrastructure layer. All this infrastructure layer information is grabbed from the Azure, and then while the operating system information is collected from the VM itself, the SAP VMs itself. As we talked earlier, we just make an SSH connection, run a bunch of commands, gather all the information that we need, and then perform the validation and analyze what is the configuration. So hence this kind of this test type is really non-intrusive, meaning there's no operation that is being performed. It's just read-only test, and this is how the configuration checks is kind of maintained as of today. And then moving on to what are the different functional testing. So this is something that we've gone over in the past video, the last video as well of the part one of the STAF that we came. So again, just to give a brief recap. So we both support functionality testing of high availability cluster for both the database tier and the central services tier. We have different, quite similar type of tests that we perform on both these tiers. The configuration checks for the high availability configuration, and then also the Azure load balancer, because Azure load balancer really plays a critical role in how the cluster would behave. And then we have some failover tests that really crash the VM, or migrate the resource from the primary side to the secondary side. And then we kill certain services or processes. There's a network test as well, where the communication between the primary and the secondary is we cut off that connection. And then there are some certain tests that we perform at the infrastructure layer, where the virtual machine either crashes or, the file system freezes, meaning the storage, the Azure NetApp file kind of freezes to communicate over the network. So these are the kind of different scenarios that we try to mimic. And these are the tests that we perform as part of the high availability functional testing. As part of the configuration checks, as Dennis mentioned, this is still in preview. However, we have different checks that we perform. Like to begin with, we have the infrastructure layer checks. As mentioned, all of this information is grabbed from the ARM. We verify the Azure compute, the storage part, the networking components. What are the and as part of the compute, the virtual machine extension, what are the different availability zones versus availability sets? And then what are the SKU? Is the SKU really supported for that particular tier? For example, is it supported for, is a particular SKU supported to be where you could install HANA database or not? So and then for the database, currently we support HANA and SAP HANA and IBM DB2. So we check for the different hardware requirements. What are the throughput of different mount points? What are the different file systems that have been configured? And then similarly for the central services layer and the application instance, as part of this configuration checks, if you have the high availability enabled, we also validate cluster configuration. And this kind of is a very tight coupling between how the cluster configuration is validated in the high availability versus this one. It's kind of the same piece of code path that is done, but it kind of gives a holistic view of the entire SAP system. And then the operating system checks are also going to verify what are the different bounds, what are the LVM groups, LVM information that is extracted from the system. And then what's the different operating system and database configuration? Is that really supported? Is that really compliant? And then what are the different control parameters? What are the different packages that are installed? What are the different versions of packages that are installed? So this kind of I give you a walkthrough of the report that is generated. That would, I think, give you a better view of how things work. And then we also have extended our support for, especially for the HANA topology, we have extended our support for the SAP HANA SRNG. This is the new HANA topology that came out recently for the SLES-based SAP database. And then this is kind of an evolving thing. The support metrics that from the last time we have some updates here by now, and then going forward also we keep updating our documentation on things that we support. So moving on to the demo part. So before I really jump into the demo, so the way this entire testing framework works is it's a 3-step process. You begin with setting up the environment. That involves setting up the management server, fetching the repository from the SAP, the Azure GitHub repository. It's an open source thing. And then once you have all these things set up, there's a setup script that kind of installs all the packages, creates that environment that are required to run the entire framework. And when I say install packages, what this really does is, everything is installed on the management server. So far yet, we have not made any connection or provided any connection details to the management server. So once it is set up, that's when, that's when we start getting into that earlier architecture that we talked about. We provide some parameters, what type of tests you want to run, what are the SAP connection details, what are the kind of, SAP parameters. And once you have provided that, that's when you kind of trigger the different tests that you want to do. That comes under the test execution phase. And then the script kind of automates the series of sequence of tests that are to be executed. And at the end of every test execution, we generate an HTML report. Optionally, you could also choose to push this data or persist this data into any of your log analytics or Azure Data Explorer and whatnot. So let's dive right into the demo. I'll stop sharing and start sharing again. So I will share, what the so I'm on my Linux VM. This is my management server, and I am in my. So I have set up the SAP Automation QA repository here. What the way I begin with is, providing parameters on the vars.camel. This is kind of the test selector that we were talking about, the test type. Either you could choose SAP functional tests or the configuration checks, and then which system are you particularly targeting. So this may the system name may look cryptic, but this is the kind of a different like a naming convention that we recommend, so you can easily identify your system. The system configurations are maintained in the system workspaces folder. So these are the different systems that we have maintained here. So what this also means that you could literally create workspace systems for all your systems that you have in your SAP landscape system, and target any one of the systems whenever you want to run, say, configuration checks or functional tests. And all of this can be persisted, like it is persisted on the VM. So you could basically come back up at any point in future and then execute these tests. So for the scope of this test, I'll show you what really goes, like how does what are the different things that you could do with the automation script. So you could run configuration checks. You could also, now we support running individual high availability tests. So you could just run, say, if you just want to test a resource migration scenario, so you could literally just run one of the test cases from a list of different test cases that we have. So for this, for now, what we are going to initialize is the configuration checks. So what this is really doing is behind the scenes, we selected the test called the configuration checks, and now it is trying to make SSH connection to all the SAP VMs that are there. So you see the SCS VM, the app VMs, and the database VMs. And what this would do is that it would collect all the information from the SAP VMs and then correlate that information that is collected from the Azure Azure ARM as well. So all the Azure checks run on the localhost, meaning from the management server, and then all the operating system information is fetched from the SAP VM itself. So after this execution finishes, what we really end up getting is like an HTML report that I can show you a demo of. Let me.
I think so. One of the things you would have noticed, Goran, is that it's collecting the information from all of the systems in one shot. And that's how, that's one of the things that Ansible does very well, is the parallelized execution of these things across the systems. And then we can gather all the information in one shot.
And those information are in those YAML file on the local host, right? About the landscape. And
right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So this is the report that, sorry, Dennis, you wanted to add?
Yeah, just wanted to update with regards to, so in order to, so we collect the information directly from the VM, each VM, you're calling the ARM using the curl command, but then there are some information like from the disk and all that, which requires the connectivity to the Azure infrastructure using AZCLI command. So one has to provide a permission for your management server to like we have one could enable the system managed identity, or you can use user managed identity and assign that user managed identity to your management server, and then provide access to for all the resources, like for the SAP system, that user identity should able to read all the resources. So you can provide at the resource group level where all the VMs are basically part of, so that it could read all the information with regards to the disk, as well as with regards to load balancer, which is part of the same resource group. So one of the things as part of the prerequisite is to provide that access as well, so that you get the concrete, because if that has not been given, some of the checks might fail because it's not able to fetch that information.
Yeah.
Right. So coming back to this report, so this is the report that you generate. It gives a holistic view of the entire SAP system, like what are the different host names that we covered, like the SCS VMs, the DB VMs, and the app VMs, and like the total number of checks, checks that were run. So the around 430 checks that were run across 6 different servers in the SAP system. So to begin with, as I was mentioning earlier, so we have the infrastructure checks, and then all part of this information is being grabbed from Azure. Part of this is grabbed from the Azure, the operating system level, and then uh, and then we have certain SAP checks as well. Here there are mount point information. What are the different mount points, the LVM information, and since this is HA, high availability is enabled on the cluster on the central services layer as well. So there's a bunch of information gathered on that layer as well. So here you see parameters validated for networking, like the network parameters, and then these are the high availability parameters as well. I apologize for the screen, the issue that you're seeing on the screen, but this is my Windows jump box. So so yeah, I mean, these are the parameters that we are very validating, and then we have like detailed outputs for every host that we run on. So this is like a system CTL. What are the different systems configuration, system parameters that we have, the cluster configuration. So what this really does is it gives an entire image of your SAP system that could be used in future or currently to troubleshoot any of the scenarios, right? So any failures that you see, you could like literally focus on failures if there are any in your SAP system. So for example, I do see there are 5 failures on the database, and if I kind of select the errors, I can like literally focus on what are the failures that are there in the system. So now I see my stripe size for the HANA log mount point is 0. For my disk performance for HANA data is 300, which is expected to be minimum of 400. So and then I can also like deep dive into what this test is really doing, and why are what is the source of this
Right.
expected behavior. So we have the
Yeah.
SAP Note link, and we have the link to our Microsoft documentation as well, like which kind of really talks about that. Why is this parameter expected to be 400?
Correct. And these checks are not actually an HA specific, right? In
Yeah,
this case,
these are
in
this case, yes. All these checks that you are seeing currently are like none of these are high availability. So
and basically you would also run on a non-HA system, central distributed as well,
exactly.
right? So there is no
Right.
limit. So only if the HA, it's just on the top, it's the HA.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So and then we have more checks that we have for so for example, we talked about the disk performance. We have the sector size. We have the OSDP configuration information about the LVM groups. One key thing that I would want to talk here and before, so we have the information about the Azure Disk SL. So when we talk about using different NFS mounts, like network file shares. So in this case, if I'm using say Azure Managed Disk, so the key thing that we have seen is often that which type of disks that the customers are using on different layers. So for example, PV1, PV2, and then what is really the max IOPS or the throughput in Mbps for those. So all of that calculation is done. While those are separate checks as well, but we also collect all of that information as part of this mount point checks or not as well. So you could see if I come up slightly. So these are the my max IOPS for is 1800 for a certain endpoint, mount point. So so this way you can really verify because these are like really the most important components for the SAP HANA data, HANA log, HANA database, HANA data, and the HANA shared. So this is the holistic view of your entire SAP landscape, which you can achieve by running the configuration checks. I would want to go back to the slides to show you what are the different components that we collect as part of the report, so that so we really talked about this high availability functional report last time around. We ran a bunch of sequence of tests, and then uh, depending on their statuses, you would really see what are the different things that go on there. And then if something goes wrong, we use the var log message logs from the var log messages, and
Nice.
to really decipher what went really wrong in that. In case, and also we log entire steps that are executed. So on the we log what are the pre-validations. If something failed there, we literally able to capture it there then and there, that what really went there, what wrong went there. And we just looked at the configuration checks report. And then that report kind of talks about different avenues of the SAP system, the infrastructure, and we try to gather all the information. And just a heads up, so this is something that we are constantly going to increase. So currently you may be seeing 430 checks. This may increase as the time goes on.
Yes.
So yeah, that kind of brings us to the end of our presentation. Dennis and Hemanth, any closing remarks if you want to add?
No, it always feels rushed when you're talking about stuff that you love to build and work with, right? So all good. Nothing from my side.
Yeah, I mean, so I think it's open for public, so who request everyone to, and it's an open source. So if you feel like there is something, some checks or some kind of input that is required, it's you can always raise the tickets, and we can look into it and we can incorporate. So it's a collaborative effort, so that we invite the community as well to help us make this tool great. And if you find any issue, or if you want to get started, you can basically refer to our learn.microsoft.com page, or basically available in the open SAP Automation QA repository to get started with.
I mean, when I just look, 450 checks, I mean, across 5-6 VMs, and you will have customer have on Azure 50 SIDs, 100 SIDs, and more.
Yeah.
Now imagine just that kind of work which you would need to do is just crazy. And I know it that those best practices are constantly changing. I mean, cloud is very dynamic. We also learn and update it, and also I've seen in the e-check you have also linked to the documentation exactly where it's specified, and this is great because all of you are part of the Azure core engineering team building and testing in advance and giving those kind of for our internal testing, and we feed this and give this to the customer, which can be better. If somebody knows how things should be done, it's you, right? So now that tool is there. Actually, this is a kind of an extension of STAF SAP automate deployment framework, a kind of which used to automate, and plus now you're doing the checking, and plus you're doing failover checks as well, or testing, and I can also imagine that offline check would be, it's kind of also very useful because there are many in those support incidents you would get these kind of just config files, you don't have access, or where it's for customer takes time maybe to set it, or they can't get it. Maybe this is a very useful and handy, just to get those XML config file of the pacemaker, just run kind of many of those kind of tests. It definitely is a kind of supportability context, very useful. So really great news, guys. I mean, great progress, and we will publish it to the customer. And definitely, I mean, all the customer and partners who are watching, I mean, please, you can always put some comments on a YouTube channel and ask what you want. And definitely, I mean, you will respond it, or on the GitHub as well, whatever it's more preferred. Yeah. So thank you guys. Looking forward also for the next version, which will be in some time, so hope to have you back again.
Yep.
Definitely.
Thank
Thanks
you
for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Garan, for having us.
Bye.
Bye.